The relationship with English is a relationship with ideas. It's not with the language, as opposed to French and Arabic. The process really goes through, of course, the formal aspect of reading and learning how to read, but also, I mean, what one learns unofficially from the various, occasions or, people around them. And this for me has been very, very important, formative, actually. It was about discovering how is it that in this very small number of words, and it was mostly poetry, one could convey so many intense, emotions, feelings, and things. So I would learn them by heart and then start reciting them to myself while walking. And these were my songs, my personal songs. The most important part were not the words, interestingly enough, but it was the musicality. I mean, not the meaning, the direct meaning, but rather the music that they made combined together. And I think basically this is. In addition to literature, to what we were reading in class, basically, at school, this is what gave me the desire to write. These beautiful pieces that I was reading, and the magic, that was in how they captured feelings and meanings. And indeed, I started writing poetry. When I showed some of my professors this kind of, writing later on, 2 or 3 of them said, but they don't rhyme. And for them, this was the most important thing. And I saw with one of them, she was, but what kind of model are you following? And I said, I'm not following, a specific model. I'm following what my ears, dictate to me. And it wasn't enough for her. It really gave me a fresh or maybe an early insight into the difficulties also that I will be facing as a writer who does not necessarily want to follow these commonly accepted rules, except when they make sense to them. And if they didn't make sense to me, basically I didn't follow them. In Arabic, it was mainly essay writing that we were exposed to. Mm-hmm. So they would give us a topic, and basically, I don't remember that we were ever asked to write an outline, but it has been such a long time that I'm not sure anymore. But we were just basically told to discuss an idea. A said, and then they would quote the person like Gibran Khalil Gibran. What do you think? Discuss. Mm-hmm. As opposed to in French, it was more structured, at least in terms of what we used to call analyse de texte, which is the analysis of text, basically, and then it was followed by an essay. So it was in 2 different parts, and actually these analyses, I remember I used to enjoy them very much because this is when I would know what the answer should be, but very often I could get away with not answering it the way it should be by justifying also, not unlike what happened informally in the house, by justifying why is it that it would be more important or more interesting to look at it in a different way, until the baccalaureate, where I was told, no, you have to stop. And basically, there is a very specific, set of expectations that you have to follow. Otherwise, you cannot pass the exam. It was then that I started also learning how to think about the audience differently. That's when I had to take into account an audience with a certain set of uncertainties that I didn't really experience before, because this is when the examiner, the imagined examiner was there as a projected, figure, and then we had to really, standardize, ways of presenting ideas. I learned a lot about how people approached writing, not as a science, not exactly as a science, but at least as something which is very, very, very structured. You know, I mean, like the elements, the components, connecting words, thesis statement, transition and the argument, concession, all of those were very, very new to me as labels. Once they were given a name, they made more sense to me. I mean, because this is how I think my mind works, you know, through, I need to know the rule before applying it, not the opposite. The CS courses initiated me to, I mean, not only to writing, but I mean, they showed me that it was possible to go beyond just answering these short questions, you know, in biology or chemistry, actually, in terms of writing. So because for me, I mean, English was a foreign language, and I had no idea whether I could perform at a certain, you know, level in it beyond, basically, like the scientific level. So this is when I started thinking, I mean, since I did biology because I wanted to have a day job, and then, you know, I basically wanted to be a creative writer, okay, in terms of what I essentially, you know, wanted to leave to this world. That's how I used to think about it. I really loved the straightforwardness of their of the English. I mean, text that I was reading. In class, we were taught how to write a thesis statement. So I could look for the thesis statement, not exactly in the same form. In many ways, sometimes maybe 2 sentences, but it's there. I can assume at least there is this kind of reassurance that you could rely on a protocol. And then basically, once the alphabet is learned, then you can basically decipher the text in a broad way. As opposed to my reluctance to modulate my writing or to nuance it differently when I was younger, for me as a graduate, as a university student, it was a must. So, you know, I was on scholarship, I needed grades, and I mean, and any approach, I mean, that could help me do so without really having to compromise my ideas was fine. So it also, I mean, I grew into this kind of knowledge, you know, and it has helped me a lot, you know, I mean, to learn different approaches, maybe for something which is very utilitarian, but I did learn. You have to observe how you build knowledge, how personally also, you know, your process of knowledge building. But for me, it was very helpful, and that's why I wanted to basically share it with you. The relationship with English is a relationship with ideas. It's not with the language, as opposed to French and Arabic. French and Arabic, I feel the rhythm of the language. I mean, why not then study French literature? And basically, the reason is not wanting to lose a specific form of intimacy that one has with the language, you know, but also discovering what can one do when they don't actually rely on that intimacy, when they get it out of the way and look at basically a text as something that is to be approached on an equal level. I mean, you know, it's not science per se, but it's something that, I mean, when given the freedom to speak, can say much more, you know, than one would expect it to. And that freedom involves this liberation from pre-existing or preformed or established concepts, you know, that one has towards the text. So basically, maybe I could like come closer to what I liked to do without really falling into I don't want to say killing, but at least into distorting my experience of writing and reading in the languages that were closest to, I mean, to my experience when I was growing up. I was introduced to the idea of researching and research in basically the context of writing, English writing. It wasn't until graduate school here also at the beginning, that I started thinking about basically writing as a form of intervention into a conversation. It was not at the undergraduate level really, and this happened not because I was taught that. It was because I read it. Intervening in the conversation is a big is not exaggerated, but at least it's a scary statement, because this is a conversation with people that are not your equals. They are people who are projected as experts in the field, and so I'm a bit wary. I have not a problem, but at least I try to qualify very strongly, what this means for the students, because I understand. I still have this fear still in me. It's a challenge to be able to utter something, when you know what the stakes are, especially for us. As a profession, it's what actually gets you to stay here or to leave. I think this we owe, ourselves to make this line about conversing with other critics and what we do, work. And we cannot make it work if we have to stop at every term that we use and say, oh, but I have to qualify. But the question is, it depends really on how much margin, what's the margin that I have? How much can I negotiate? And also, how much can I work within this area of uncertainty? This is basically what we spend most of our professional energy on. The approach has changed. Okay, the schools, the way in which basically you allot space for the text versus the theory in the article has also changed a lot. Actually, sometimes the text is marginalized for the sake of context and theory. It's not anymore about the aesthetic value. It's about, can you approach it? Do you have the tools, basically the critical tools, to approach it from this particular perspective? Even for someone who's tried to read very, very much about their topic, it is something very challenging also, because very often in this kind of profession, the voice of the critic is very, very strong. The voice of your reviewer, potential reviewer, the voice of your potential, basically, leader is strong, which is something that could be very positive, but also extremely debilitating in certain instances. In particular, as I said, because there is no place of safety that one has that could basically be there because of tenure or because of a certain system that would allow for productivity to take its time. I find it challenging. I like it when it's challenging up to a certain point, but when it comes basically just a form of challenge for the sake of it, that's when it becomes useless for me. Within our own writing, when we have to justify importance. And the very same, and I've had that experience with my own articles, the very same part which could be highly appreciated by one reviewer could have a so what next to it by another reviewer. And this is just two people. Think about, how many people you have. So the challenge is really about negotiating the boundaries of what is wanted from you, and what you want to really put in a piece of analysis. I live writing. I live it in the body, and sometimes it's a lot of trouble because it's when you look at it within a professional context, it has to be systematized. It has to be thought out in a logical sequence, and which is basically a different level of experience than how I instinctively think about it. I look at even poetry in English as basically very much a study, an object of study. And sometimes I'm surprised because I still have tears when I read this, and I thought I was immune, quote unquote, to that because it's an object of study. And basically for me this has been a constant struggle separating, dividing, those kinds of worlds because one of the problems of this kind of field, and basically of having to deal with this field and this profession, is that the personal and the professional, they are very intertwined in many ways, and this makes it very hard to like say, okay, to delimit realms, basically. So to say, okay, this is a time, basically, this is my personal time, and this is the time of writing, or because even that, they're not, that separate. Also the question of what one does, why one writes, except that this is, part of the requirements of the profession, is very much on my mind every time I devote like 10, 12 hours, per day sometimes to this process. Because it's also, sometimes I do have, these questions about outcome, what am I doing? Why am I putting so much effort for something that has no guaranteed results? So, very often you get into, you start projects, but they don't materialize in the way institutionally readable or legible. So basically, I also spent a lot of time trying to dissociate the idea of worth in terms of writing from academic, just trying not to limit it only to academic worth and audience. I tell the students, especially for the critical articles on those texts, I'd like you to reflect about what the author has promised and what they have delivered. And they don't, you don't have to always believe them. When we read the text, yes, we need to, of course, look at what the promise is, how the argument has been developed, understand it, make sure that we understood it before going quickly into judging, what was. But we have also to be aware that actually it's not something that's set in stone. And that the fact that it has been accepted to be published in a journal does not mean necessarily that if there's something you don't understand, it is something that you don't understand because that's you who are reading. I say, we are aware that it's a different power relationship, that's something that has been published, has a different visibility, has a different voice for you, than your own. But remember, this author himself, herself, they were in your shoes some time ago. This is something which is, it's an experiment, and there are no guarantees. I tell them it's my struggle, it's my also phobia, But for you, it's important because it's a great thing, it's a course thing. For me, it's also a life-changing thing if I don't do it. So don't worry, I understand, how the struggle could, how the struggle could develop.